Thomas McAllister wiped the sweat from his face as he looked at the dark clouds moving across the sky. The young man was only 23 years old, but he already knew how to read the signs of a bad storm coming. His cattle were acting strange, too. They kept looking up at the sky and moving closer together. The year was 1885, and Thomas was driving his small herd of 30 cattle across the rough land of Arizona Territory. He had been traveling for 3 days now, looking for a good place where his animals could eat grass during the winter months. The land here was dry and rocky, with tall red rocks sticking up like fingers toward the sky. Thomas had grown up on a small ranch in Texas with his father and older brother Jacob. His father had taught him everything about raising cattle and surviving in the wild. But his father had also told him many scary stories about the Apache Indians who lived in this part of the country. "Stay away from them, son," his father had said many times. "They are dangerous people who will kill you and steal your cattle. They move like ghosts in the night and know this land better than any white man ever will." Thomas had heard these stories his whole life. Everyone in Texas talked about Apache raids and the terrible things that happened to settlers who got too close to Apache land. The newspapers were full of stories about burned farms and missing people. Thomas had never actually seen an Apache person, but he was afraid of them just like everyone else. Now, as he rode his horse through this wild country, Thomas felt that fear growing in his chest. This was Apache territory. He knew it, and his horse knew it too. The brown mare kept turning her ears and looking around nervously. The wind started to blow harder, and Thomas could smell rain coming. His cattle were getting more upset by the minute. The big black bull that led the herd was making low, worried sounds. The cows were pushing their calves closer and looking for somewhere to hide. Thomas knew he had to find shelter soon. A bad storm in this rocky country could scatter his cattle or even kill them. Without his cattle, Thomas would have nothing. He had spent all his money buying these animals, and they were his only chance to start his own ranch. He stood up in his saddle and looked around carefully. The land was full of deep canyons and tall rock walls. Most of them were too steep or too narrow for his cattle. He needed to find a place that was big enough for 30 animals and safe from the wind and rain. That was when Thomas saw the thin line of smoke rising from a canyon about a mile away. His heart started beating fast. Smoke meant people. And in this part of Arizona, people usually meant Apache. Thomas pulled his rifle from its holder and checked to make sure it was loaded. His hands were shaking a little. But then he looked at the dark clouds again. They were moving fast now, and he could see lightning flashing inside them. The wind was getting stronger, and his cattle were starting to panic. Some of the younger animals were trying to run away. Thomas had to make a choice. He could try to find another place to hide, but there might not be time. The storm would hit soon, and if he was caught in the open, he could lose everything. Or he could go toward the smoke and hope that whoever made it would not kill him. Thunder rolled across the sky like the sound of 100 drums. Thomas's horse jumped and almost threw him off. His cattle were now making loud, scared noises and trying to move in different directions. "Easy, girl," Thomas said to his horse, patting her neck. "We have to make a decision here." He thought about his father's warnings. He thought about all the stories he had heard about Apache warriors, but he also thought about his cattle and how much they meant to him. Without them, he would have to go back to Texas with nothing. The first big drops of rain started to fall. They hit the dust around him and made small clouds of dirt. The storm was almost here. Thomas made his choice. He turned his horse toward the smoke and started pushing his cattle in that direction. "Come on," he shouted at the animals. "Move!" The cattle did not want to go at first. They could smell something that scared them. But Thomas and his horse worked together to push the herd forward. The rain was falling harder now, and the animals finally decided that getting wet was worse than whatever was waiting ahead. As they got closer to the canyon, Thomas could see that the smoke was coming from deep inside it. The canyon walls were high and would give good protection from the storm. But the smoke meant people were there, people who might not want visitors. Thomas checked his rifle again and made sure his pistol was ready too. He had learned to shoot when he was just a boy, and he was good at it. But he also knew that if there were many Apache warriors in that canyon, his guns would not help him much. The thunder was getting louder, and the lightning was flashing more often. Thomas's cattle were now running toward the canyon on their own, looking for shelter. He had no choice but to follow them. As he rode closer, Thomas tried to remember everything his father had taught him about dealing with dangerous situations. "Stay calm," his father had said. "Think before you act, and always be ready to fight if you have to." But Thomas had never been in a situation like this before. His mouth was dry, and his heart was beating so hard he thought it might jump out of his chest. The rain was coming down hard now, soaking through his clothes and making it hard to see. Just as Thomas reached the entrance to the canyon, a huge bolt of lightning lit up the sky. In that bright flash, he saw something that made him stop breathing for a moment. Two figures were standing at the mouth of the canyon, watching him come. Even in the quick flash of light, Thomas could see they were wearing Apache clothing. And they were both women. The lightning faded, leaving Thomas in the gray darkness of the storm. His cattle were already moving into the canyon, desperate to get out of the rain. Thomas sat on his horse in the pouring rain, staring into the darkness where he had seen the two Apache women. Everything his father had told him said he should turn around and ride away as fast as he could. But the storm was getting worse, and his cattle were already in the canyon. There was no going back now. Thomas took a deep breath and rode forward into the unknown. The rain was coming down so hard that Thomas could barely see 5 feet in front of him. Water ran down his face and dripped from his hat as he guided his horse deeper into the canyon. His cattle had already disappeared into the darkness ahead, following their instinct to find shelter. Thomas held his rifle ready, but his hands were so wet and cold that he was not sure he could use it properly if he needed to. The thunder was so loud now that it echoed off the canyon walls like cannon. Fire! Each flash of lightning showed him glimpses of the rocky walls rising high above him. As he rode further into the canyon, Thomas began to smell wood smoke more strongly. There was also the smell of cooking food, which made his empty stomach growl. He had not eaten since early morning, and the hard work of driving cattle had made him very hungry. Suddenly his horse stopped. Thomas squinted through the rain and saw a warm yellow light coming from somewhere ahead. As another lightning bolt lit up the canyon, he could see his cattle standing in a large open area. They had found shelter under a natural roof of rock that stuck out from the canyon wall. But what surprised Thomas most was that his cattle were calm. They were not running or making scared noises anymore. Instead, they were quietly standing together, chewing, and looking peaceful. This was very strange. Cattle could sense danger, and if there were hostile people nearby, the animals would be acting afraid. Thomas heard a sound behind him and turned around quickly. One of the Apache women was standing about 10 feet away watching him. She had appeared so quietly that Thomas had not heard her coming, even though he was listening carefully. The woman looked to be in her late 20s. She had long black hair that was wet from the rain, and she wore a dress made of soft leather decorated with small beads. Her face was serious, but not angry. She was looking at Thomas with curious eyes, as if she was trying to figure out what kind of person he was. Thomas started to raise his rifle, but the woman held up her hand in a peaceful gesture. She said something in a language Thomas did not understand, but her voice was calm and gentle. She pointed toward the shelter where his cattle were standing, then pointed at Thomas and his horse. Another flash of lightning showed Thomas the second woman standing near his cattle. She was younger than the first, maybe in her early 20s. She was gently touching the neck of Thomas's big black bull, and the animal was letting her do it. This amazed Thomas because that bull did not trust anyone except him. The older woman said something else and started walking toward the shelter. She looked back at Thomas and gestured for him to follow her. Thomas hesitated for a moment. Everything he had been taught told him this was a trap. But the rain was getting worse, and he could see that his cattle were safe and calm. Thomas made a decision that surprised himself. He put his rifle back in its holder and followed the woman toward the shelter. Under the rocky overhang, Thomas found an amazing sight. Someone had built a comfortable living area in this natural cave. There were woven mats on the ground, clay pots for storing water and food, and a fire pit with stones arranged in a circle. The fire was burning brightly, giving off warmth and light that felt wonderful after the cold rain. The younger woman was already taking care of Thomas's horse. She had removed the saddle and was rubbing the animal down with a piece of soft leather. The horse, who was usually nervous around strangers, was standing quietly and seemed to enjoy the attention. Thomas stood there dripping wet, not sure what to do. The older woman looked at him and seemed to understand his confusion. She pointed to herself and said, "Ayana." Then she pointed to the younger woman and said, "Kaya." Thomas pointed to himself and said, "Thomas." Both women repeated his name carefully, trying to get the sounds right. When they said it, it sounded different but somehow better than when other people said it. Ayana gestured for Thomas to sit down near the fire. She brought him a thick blanket that was surprisingly soft and warm. As Thomas wrapped it around his shoulders, he began to feel the feeling return to his fingers and toes. Kaya finished taking care of his horse and came to sit by the fire. She had a clay pot that she placed over the flames. Soon the smell of cooking food filled the air. Thomas's stomach growled loudly, which made both women smile. While they waited for the food to cook, Thomas looked around their shelter more carefully. He could see that these women had been living here for some time. Everything was neat and well organized. There were baskets full of dried plants and roots, tools made from stone and bone, and beautiful blankets with complex patterns. On one wall of the cave, someone had painted pictures of animals and people. The painting showed hunters on horses, women gathering plants, and children playing. Thomas realized he was looking at the story of these people's lives. Ayana noticed him looking at the paintings. She stood up and pointed to different pictures, saying words in her language. Thomas could not understand the words, but he could see in her face that she was telling him about her family and her people. When she pointed to a picture of a man on a horse, her expression became sad. She touched her heart and shook her head. Thomas understood that someone important to her was gone, probably dead. Kaya served the food in wooden bowls. It was a thick soup made with meat and vegetables that Thomas did not recognize. But it tasted wonderful, and the warm food made him feel much better. As he ate, Thomas realized that these women were taking very good care of him, even though he was a stranger who had appeared at their home in the middle of a storm. Outside, the storm continued to rage. The wind howled through the canyon, and the rain fell in sheets. But inside the shelter, Thomas felt safe and warm. His cattle were quiet and comfortable, and his horse was resting peacefully. As the evening went on, Thomas began to relax. He watched Ayana and Kaya as they worked around their home. They moved with quiet grace and seemed to know exactly what the other was thinking. Sometimes they would look at each other and smile, sharing some private joke or memory. Thomas tried to talk to them using the few Spanish words he knew. Some of the words seemed familiar to them, and they were able to communicate simple ideas. Ayana showed him that they knew some English words too. She pointed to things around the cave and said fire, water, and food in English. When it was time to sleep, the women gave Thomas more blankets and showed him a comfortable place to lie down. They made their own beds on the other side of the fire, giving him privacy while still staying close enough to keep the fire going during the round night. As Thomas lay in the darkness listening to the storm, he thought about how different this was from what he had expected. These Apache women were not the dangerous savages he had been told about. They were kind and generous people who had saved his life and the lives of his animals. For the first time since leaving Texas, Thomas felt truly safe. The warmth of the fire, the sound of the rain outside, and the quiet breathing of his hosts made him feel peaceful. As he drifted off to sleep, Thomas had no idea that this night would change everything he thought he knew about the world. Thomas woke up to the sound of quiet voices and the smell of cooking food. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then he remembered the storm, the canyon, and the two Apache women who had given him shelter. He sat up slowly and looked around. The fire was burning brightly, and both Ayana and Kaya were awake. They were talking in their own language while preparing what looked like breakfast. Outside the cave, Thomas could hear that the storm was still going strong, but it did not sound as bad as it had during the night. Ayana noticed that Thomas was awake and said something to Kaya. The younger woman brought him a cup made from a gourd. It was filled with hot tea that tasted like plants and honey. Thomas had never tasted anything like it, but it was good and made him feel more awake. "Thank you," Thomas said, trying to show with his hands that he was grateful. Both women smiled and nodded. Ayana pointed to the tea and said several words in her language, probably telling him what it was made from. As they ate breakfast together, Thomas tried to learn more about his hosts. Using simple words and hand gestures, he asked Ayana how old she was. She held up her fingers to show him 28. When he asked Kaya the same question, she showed him 24. Thomas pointed to himself and held up 2 hands, then 3, more fingers to show that he was 23. This seemed to surprise them that he was younger than Kaya, probably because he was tall and had a beard that made him look older. After breakfast, Thomas wanted to check on his cattle. Ayana seemed to understand and led him to where the animals were resting. Thomas was amazed to see that someone had given his cattle fresh grass to eat. The animals looked calm and healthy, much better than they had looked during the storm. Kaya was already there, gently touching the cattle and examining them to make sure they were not hurt. She moved among the large animals without any fear, and they seemed to trust her completely. When she found a small cut on one of the cows, she went to get something from the cave. She came back with a small clay pot filled with a thick green mixture. Very carefully, she put this mixture on the cow's cut. The animal stood still and let her do it as if it knew she was trying to help. Thomas watched this with great interest. He pointed to the pot and tried to ask what was in it. Kaya took him to the back of the cave, where there were many baskets filled with different plants. She showed him dried leaves, roots, and flowers, saying the names in her language. Thomas realized that these women knew a lot about medicine made from plants. He had heard that some Indian tribes knew about healing, but he had never seen it for himself. He watched as Kaya showed him different plants and explained with hand gestures what each one was used for. One plant was for headaches. She touched her head and made a face like it hurt, then showed how the plant made the pain go away. Another was for cuts and wounds. A third one was for stomach problems. Thomas was amazed by how much they knew. As the morning went on, the 3 of them found ways to talk to each other, even though they spoke different languages. Thomas would point to something and say its name in English. Then Ayana or Kaya would say the same thing in their language. Soon, Thomas was learning Apache words, and the women were learning more English. Thomas learned that the word for horse was besh, and the word for cow was waki. The word for fire was ko, and water was tu. Every time Thomas said a word correctly, both women would smile and nod encouragingly. Ayana seemed especially interested in learning English. She would repeat words over and over until she could say them perfectly. Thomas could tell that she was very smart and had a good memory for languages. During a quiet moment, Thomas tried to learn more about their family. He pointed to the paintings on the wall and asked questions with his hands. Ayana's face became sad when she pointed to the picture of the man on horseback. She made gestures that seemed to show fighting and death. Through more gestures and simple words, Thomas understood that the man in the picture had been Ayana's husband. He had been killed 2 years ago in a fight with soldiers. Ayana touched her heart and shook her head, showing that she still missed him very much. Thomas felt sorry for her loss. He tried to say that he was sad for her, using the few words he had learned and touching his own heart. Ayana seemed to understand and gave him a small, grateful smile. Kaya's story was different. When Thomas asked about her with gestures, she showed him that she had never been married. Instead, she pointed to pictures of children on the wall. Through more gestures, Thomas learned that Kaya spent her time taking care of children who had no parents. This surprised Thomas. He had always heard that Apache people were warriors who only cared about fighting. But here was a young woman who chose to spend her life caring for orphaned children instead of getting married and having her own family. As the day continued, Thomas learned more about how smart and skilled these women were. Ayana showed him how they stored water in special clay pots that kept it cool even in hot weather. Kaya demonstrated how they preserved meat by drying it in a special way that made it last for months. They showed him tools made from stone that were sharper than many metal tools he had used. They had needles made from bone that were perfect for sewing. Their baskets were woven so tightly that they could hold water without leaking. Thomas began to realize that everything he had been taught about Apache people was wrong. These were not savage people who lived like animals. They were intelligent and civilized with their own ways of doing things that often worked better than the white man's ways. When the afternoon came, the storm finally began to weaken. Thomas knew that soon he would have to leave and continue his journey. The thought made him feel sad, which surprised him. Just yesterday he had been afraid of these people. Now he did not want to leave them. As if reading his thoughts, Ayanna came to sit beside him near the fire. She had been working on something all morning, and now she showed him what it was. She had made a small pouch from soft leather and filled it with some of the healing plants. She gave the pouch to Thomas and showed him how to use the plants if he got hurt or sick. Her hands were gentle as she explained, and Thomas could see kindness in her eyes that reminded him of his own mother. Kaya also had a gift for him. She had prepared extra food for his journey, wrapping dried meat and other things in clean cloth. She also gave him a small water pot that would keep water cool during hot days. As Thomas accepted these gifts, he felt something change inside him. These women had no reason to be kind to him. He was a stranger from a people who had been their enemies, but they had treated him like family, sharing their food, their shelter, and their knowledge. Thomas tried to give them something in return. He had a silver coin in his pocket that his father had given him for good luck. He offered it to Ayanna, but she gently pushed his hand away and shook her head. She pointed to her heart and then to him, showing that his friendship was payment enough. As the evening came, Thomas realized that this day had taught him more than all the years of his life before. He had learned that people could be good and kind no matter what they looked like or what language they spoke. He had learned that there were different ways to live in the world, and some of them might be better than what he had always known. Most importantly, Thomas had learned that the stories he had been told about Apache people were lies. These were not dangerous savages. They were human beings with hearts and minds just like his own. As he prepared to sleep his second night in the canyon, Thomas knew that he would never be the same person he had been before the storm. Tomorrow he would have to leave, but he would carry the memory of Ayanna and Kaya with him forever. Thomas woke to bright sunlight streaming into the cave. The storm had finally passed, and the morning air was fresh and clean. He could hear birds singing outside, and the peaceful sounds of his cattle moving around. Ayanna was already awake, sitting by the fire and working on something with her hands. When she saw Thomas sit up, she smiled and pointed outside. The message was clear. It was a beautiful day. After they shared breakfast, Thomas prepared to gather his cattle and continue his journey. But Ayanna seemed to have other ideas. She spoke to Kaya in their language, then came to Thomas and gestured for him to follow her. Instead of leading him toward the canyon entrance where he had come in, Ayanna walked deeper into the canyon. Thomas was confused but curious. He left his cattle resting and followed the two women along a narrow path between high rock walls. The path wound through several small canyons, each one more beautiful than the last. The red and orange rocks created amazing shapes, and small streams of clear water ran between them. Thomas had never seen such beautiful country. After walking for about 30 minutes, they came to a place where the narrow canyon opened up into a wide valley. What Thomas saw there took his breath away. The valley was full of life. There were small farms with green plants growing in neat rows. Horses grazed in fenced areas, and Thomas could see people working in the fields. Children were playing near a stream that ran through the middle of the valley. This was not what Thomas had expected to find in Apache territory. He had been told that Apache people lived in small groups, moving from place to place and never staying anywhere long enough to grow crops. But here was a community that looked like it had been here for many years. Ayanna and Kaya led him down into the valley. As they walked, people stopped their work to look at the white stranger. Thomas felt nervous, but he noticed that the people seemed more curious than hostile. Some of them waved, and the children followed at a distance, giggling and whispering to each other. The first thing that surprised Thomas was how the Apache had organized their farms. They had built a system of small channels that carried water, From the stream to all the fields, the water flowed through these channels in a careful pattern that made sure every plant got exactly the right amount. Thomas had seen irrigation systems before, but never one this clever. The Apache had figured out how to use the natural slope of the land to make the water go exactly where they wanted it. No water was wasted, and even during dry times the plants would have enough to grow. Kaya showed him the different crops they were growing. There was corn, beans, and squash growing together in the same fields. She explained with hand gestures that these three plants helped each other grow better when they were planted together. Thomas had always planted his crops separately, the way his father had taught him. But he could see that the Apache method worked very well. The plants looked healthy and strong, and Kaya showed him that they got more food from their fields this way. They visited the area where the Apache kept their horses. Thomas was amazed by the quality of the animals. These were not the small, tough ponies he had expected. These were beautiful, strong horses that looked like they could run for miles without getting tired. An old Apache man was working with a young horse, teaching it to accept a rider. Thomas watched in amazement as the man worked. He never used force or violence. Instead, he was patient and gentle, talking quietly to the horse and moving slowly until the animal learned to trust him. Ayana spoke to the old man in their language and pointed to Thomas. The man nodded and gestured for Thomas to come closer. Through Ayana, Thomas learned that this was her uncle, and he was known for his skill with horses. The old man looked at Thomas carefully, then pointed to his own horse standing nearby. Guide said something to Ayana, who translated using the English words she had learned. Thomas understood that the man was inviting him to ride the horse. Thomas had been riding horses his whole life, but this horse was different from any he had ever ridden. It moved like it was dancing, responding to the smallest touch or movement from Thomas. The horse seemed to know what Thomas wanted before Thomas even knew it himself. When Thomas brought the horse back, the old man nodded with approval. He said something to Ayana that made her smile. She told Thomas that her uncle said he had good hands with horses, which Thomas understood was a high compliment. As they continued walking through the valley, Thomas met more of the Apache people. There was a woman who made pottery that was more beautiful than anything Thomas had ever seen. Her pots were not just useful, they were works of art, decorated with complex patterns and painted in bright colors. Another man showed Thomas tools he had made from metal. Thomas was surprised to learn that some Apache people knew how to work with iron and steel. The tools were well made and looked like they would last for many years. Everywhere Thomas looked, he saw evidence that these people had skills and knowledge that he had never heard about. They had their own ways of doing things that often worked, better than the methods used by white settlers. But what impressed Thomas most was how the people treated each other. He saw older people being cared for with respect and love. Children were never hit or yelled at, but they were well behaved and helpful. Everyone seemed to have a job to do, and everyone worked together for the good of the whole community. During the afternoon, Ayana took Thomas to meet the village leaders. They were sitting in the shade of a large tree, discussing something important. When Ayana brought Thomas forward, the leaders looked at him with careful eyes. The oldest leader, a woman with gray hair and a kind face, spoke to Thomas in English. Her words were careful and slow, but clear. "You are welcome here," she said. "Ayana has told us that you show respect for our ways." "This is good." Thomas tried to answer respectfully. "Thank you for letting me see your home. It is more beautiful than I thought possible," the old woman smiled. "Many of your people have wrong ideas about us. They think we are wild people who live like animals. But you can see this is not true." Thomas nodded. "Yes, I can see that everything I was told was wrong. Your people are wise and skilled. You have built something wonderful here." The leaders talked among themselves in their language for several minutes. Finally, the old woman spoke to Thomas again. "We will tell you something that few white people know. This valley has been our home for more than 100 years. Our grandfathers chose this place because it was hidden and safe. Here we can live in peace and raise our children without fear." She pointed to the farms and houses around them. "Everything you see here, we built with our own hands. We learn to grow food that feeds us all year. We learn to make everything we need to live well. We are not poor or savage, we are a rich people, rich in knowledge and in love for each other. Thomas felt honored that they were sharing this secret with him. He could see why they kept this place hidden. If the government knew about this peaceful community, they would probably force the Apache to leave and give the land to white settlers. As the sun began to set, Ayanna and Kaya led Thomas back toward their canyon. The walk gave him time to think about everything he had seen. His whole understanding of the world had been turned upside down in just one day. That evening, as they sat around the fire, Thomas tried to express his feelings to his hosts. Using the words he had learned and many hand gestures, he told them how grateful he was for what they had shown him. Ayanna listened carefully, then spoke to him in her mixture of English and Apache. "You have good heart," she said. "You see truth with your eyes, not with stories other people tell you. This makes you different from most white men." Kaya added something in their language that made Ayanna nod. "My sister says you are welcome to stay with us as long as you want. Your cattle are happy here, and we enjoy having you as our friend." Thomas felt a warm feeling in his chest. These people had accepted him in a way that felt deeper than anything he had ever experienced. For the first time in his life, he felt like he truly belonged somewhere. As he lay down to sleep that night, Thomas faced a difficult decision. He had planned to find winter grazing for his cattle and then return to Texas in the spring. But now, he was not sure he wanted to leave this place and these people. The thought of going back to his old life, where Apache people were considered enemies, made him feel sick. How could he pretend to hate people who had shown him such kindness? How could he go back to believing lies when he had seen the truth with his own eyes? Thomas stared at the fire and wondered what he should do. Tomorrow, he would have to make a choice that would affect the rest of his life. Thomas woke before dawn, unable to sleep. His mind was full of conflicting thoughts about what he should do. Part of him wanted to stay in this peaceful valley forever, but another part reminded him of his responsibilities back in Texas. He sat by the dying fire, watching the red coals glow in the darkness. His cattle were resting peacefully nearby, and he could hear the quiet breathing of Ayanna and Kaya as they slept. In a few hours, he would have to make the most important decision of his life. When the sun came up, Thomas began preparing his cattle for the journey. He had decided to continue looking for winter grazing land, at least for now. He could not make such a big decision so quickly. He needed time to think. Ayanna and Kaya helped him get ready. They prepared food for his journey and checked his supplies. But Thomas could see that they were sad to see him go. During the past 3 days, they had become friends in a way that went deeper than words. As Thomas was loading his pack onto his horse, Ayanna approached him with a serious expression on her face. She gestured for him to sit down with her. Kaya joined them, and both women looked at Thomas with careful eyes. Ayanna spoke slowly, using the English words she had learned mixed with her own language. Thomas had to listen carefully to understand what she was saying. "Thomas," she began, "we want to ask you something important. But first we must tell you about our problems." She pointed toward the hidden valley where they had taken him the day before. "Our people live in peace here, but it is not easy. We need things we cannot make ourselves. We need metal tools, cloth, salt, and medicine from the white man's world." Kaya nodded and added her own words. "Before we could trade with Mexican people. They were not afraid of us, but now, Americans control this land. Most Americans will not trade with Apache people. They think we are all dangerous." Ayanna continued the explanation. "Sometimes our young men try to get what we need by raiding, but this makes more trouble for everyone. The soldiers come and hurt innocent people. We lose more than we gain." Thomas began to understand what they were telling him. The Apache community was caught between two worlds. They wanted to live in peace, but they needed supplies from the outside world to survive. Because most white people were afraid of them, it was almost impossible to get these supplies through honest trade. Ayanna looked directly into Thomas's eyes. "We have watched you for 3 days. We see that you are different from other white men. You do not hate us because of the color of our skin or the stories you have heard. You judge us by what you see with your own eyes. She paused as if gathering courage for what she was about to say next. The elders have talked about you. They have made a decision. We want to ask you to help us. Thomas felt his heart start beating faster. What kind of help do you need? Kaya spoke up. We need someone who can go to the white towns and trade for us. Someone who looks like them and speaks their language. Someone they will not be afraid of. Ayana nodded. You could buy the things we need and bring them here. We have gold and silver to pay for everything. We are not asking for charity. This would be business, but business that helps both sides. Thomas stared at them, trying to understand what they were really asking. You want me to be a trader? To be a bridge between your people and mine? Yes, Ayana said. But it would mean more than just buying things for us. It would mean that you understand our ways and care about what happens to us. It would mean you become part of our community. The weight of what they were asking hit Thomas like a physical blow. They were offering him a chance to completely change his life. Instead of being a simple cattle rancher, he could become something that had probably never existed before, a white man who truly belonged to an Apache community. Kaya reached out and touched his hand gently. We know this is a big thing to ask. You have your own life, your own family. We do not expect an answer today. But Ayana looked at him with intense eyes. Think about what you have seen here, Thomas. Think about the children playing by the stream, the old people being cared for, the horses running free. Think about the lies your people tell about us and the truth you have seen with your own eyes. She stood up and walked to the edge of the canyon, looking out at the vast landscape beyond. If you help us, you will not just be helping Apache people. You will be helping to build a bridge between two peoples who should be friends, not enemies. Thomas felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the choice they were putting before him. If he said yes, he would be giving up everything he had planned for his life. He would be choosing to live among people that his own family and friends considered enemies. But if he said no, he would be walking away from the most meaningful thing that had ever happened to him. He would be abandoning people who had shown him kindness and trust when they had no reason to do so. Ayana came back and sat down beside him. There is something else you should know. If you choose to help us, it will not be without danger. Many white people will not understand. They will call you a traitor. Some might even try to hurt you. Thomas thought about his brother Jacob back in Texas. Jacob had always been suspicious of anyone who was different. How would he react if Thomas told him he was going to live with Apache people and help them trade with white settlements? My family will never understand, Thomas said quietly. Kaya spoke gently. Sometimes a man must choose between the family he was born into and the family he chooses for himself. Neither choice is wrong, but a man can only follow one path. Ayana added, we are not asking you to forget your people or hate them. We are asking you to help us build understanding between our peoples. Maybe someday there will be no need for hiding or fear. Thomas looked at his cattle grazing peacefully in the canyon. Just a few days ago, his biggest worry had been finding good grass for them to eat during the winter. Now he was being asked to become part of something much larger and more important. How would it work? He asked. If I said yes, what would I do? Ayana smiled, and Thomas could see hope in her eyes. You would travel to different towns and buy the things we need. You would bring them here and we would pay you fairly for your work. When you were not traveling, you could live here with us. You could learn our language and our ways. You could also teach us about your world, Kaya added. Help us understand white people better. Maybe you could even help us find other white people who would be willing to trade with us honestly. Thomas felt his heart pulling him towards saying yes, but his mind warned him about all the problems this choice could create. He would be going against everything he had been taught since childhood. He would be risking his safety and his future. But then he thought about the children he had seen playing in the hidden valley. He thought about the old Apache woman who had welcomed him with kindness. He thought about Ayana, who had lost her husband to violence, and Kaya, who spent her life caring for orphaned children. These people deserved to live in peace. They deserved to have access to the same things that white people took for granted. And maybe, just maybe, Thomas could help make that happen. Ayana seemed to sense his internal struggle. You do not have to decide right now, she said. Take your cattle and continue your journey. Think about what we have asked. If you decide to help us, come back here in the spring. We will be waiting. Thomas nodded, grateful for the time to think. But even as he said goodbye and prepared to leave the canyon, he had a feeling that his decision was already made. Something had changed inside him during these 3 days, something that could never be changed back. As he drove his cattle out of the canyon and back into the vast Arizona landscape, Thomas carried with him more than supplies and memories. He carried the weight of a choice that would define the rest of his life. Thomas spent 2 weeks driving his cattle across the Arizona territory, but his mind was not on grazing land or water sources. Every day he thought about Ayanna and Kaya and the choice they had offered him. Every night, as he sat by his campfire, he imagined what his life could be like if he returned to their hidden valley. He found good winter grazing in a valley about 50 miles from the Apache settlement. His cattle were happy there, with plenty of grass and water, but Thomas felt restless and empty. The simple life of a cattle rancher no longer seemed meaningful to him. After much thinking, Thomas made his decision. He would return to the Apache community and accept their offer. But first he had to deal with a problem he had been dreading: his brother Jacob. Thomas had promised to meet Jacob in the town of Tucson in December to discuss plans for the spring. When the time came, Thomas rode into town with a heavy heart, knowing that this conversation would probably end his relationship with his brother forever. Jacob was waiting at the hotel, just as they had planned. When he saw Thomas, his face lit up with a big smile. "Tom, you look good. How did the cattle business go? Did you find good land?" Thomas felt terrible as he looked at his brother's happy face. Jacob had always looked up to him, and now Thomas was about to destroy his trust completely. "Jacob, we need to talk about something important," Thomas said as they sat down in the hotel restaurant. "Sure, what's on your mind?" Jacob asked, still smiling. Thomas took a deep breath. "I'm not coming back to Texas, I'm staying here in Arizona." Jacob's smile faded. "What do you mean? What about our plans to expand the ranch? What about the family business?" "I've found something more important than cattle ranching," Thomas said. "I've met some people here who need my help. I'm going to work with them." Jacob looked confused. "What kind of people? What kind of work?" Thomas knew there was no easy way to say it. "Apache people, Jacob. I'm going to live with them and help them trade with white settlements." The color drained from Jacob's face. He stared at his brother as if Thomas had just told him he was planning to fly to the moon. "You're joking," Jacob said finally. "Tell me you're joking." "I'm not joking. I've spent time with these people and they're not what we were taught to believe. They're good people who just want to live in peace." Jacob's face turned red with anger. "Have you lost your mind? These are the same people who killed the Henderson family last year. They're murderers and thieves." "The people I know are not murderers," Thomas said firmly. "They're farmers and horse trainers and healers. They take care of orphan children and welcome strangers with kindness." Jacob stood up so quickly that his chair fell over. Other people in the restaurant turned to look at them. "I don't know what they did to your brain, but you're not thinking clearly. We're going back to Texas right now and you're going to see a doctor." "I'm not sick, Jacob. I'm finally seeing clearly for the first time in my life." Jacob sat back down and leaned across the table. His voice was low and dangerous. "Listen to me very carefully, Tom. If you go live with those savages, you are no longer my brother. You'll be dead to me and to the whole family." Thomas felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. He had expected Jacob to be angry, but he had not expected to be completely disowned by his family. "Jacob, please try to understand." "There's nothing to understand," Jacob shouted. "You've been brainwashed by murderers. I should have known something was wrong when you didn't come home when you were supposed to." Jacob stood up again and threw some money on the table. "I'm going to give you one more chance, Tom. Come back to Texas with me right now and we'll pretend this conversation never happened. But if you choose those people over your own family, don't ever come back." Thomas looked at his brother's angry face and felt his heart breaking. But he also felt a strange sense of peace. He had made his choice and he was going to stick with it. "I'm sorry, Jacob." I can't go back to living a lie. Jacob stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head in disgust. You're dead to me, he said, and walked out of the restaurant. Thomas sat alone at the table, feeling empty and sad. He had just lost his family, but he had gained something else, the freedom to follow his conscience and do what he believed was right. The next morning, Thomas sold his cattle to a rancher outside Tucson. He kept only his horse and his personal belongings. With the money from the cattle sale, he bought supplies that he knew the Apache community needed: metal tools, cloth, medicine, salt, and other things they could not make themselves. It took him 3 days to travel back to the hidden canyon where Ayanna and Kaya lived. As he approached their shelter, his heart was beating fast with excitement and nervousness. What if they had changed their minds? What if they no longer wanted his help? But when Ayanna saw him coming, her face broke into the biggest smile Thomas had ever seen. She ran toward him, calling out to Kaya in their language. Soon both women were there, talking excitedly and gesturing toward the supplies he was carrying. You came back, Ayanna said in English, her voice full of joy. We hoped you would, but we were not sure. I made my choice, Thomas said. I want to help your people. I want to be part of your community. Kaya clapped her hands together with happiness. This is wonderful news. Wait until the elders hear. That evening, Thomas was brought before the council of elders in the hidden valley. The old woman who had spoken to him before stood up and addressed the gathered people in both Apache and English. This white man has chosen to join our community, she said. He has given up his old life to help us build a bridge between our peoples. We welcome him as one of our own. The crowd of Apache people began to cheer and sing. Children ran up to Thomas with shy smiles. Men shook his hand and women brought him gifts of food and blankets. But the most meaningful moment came when an old Apache man approached Thomas with a serious expression. The man spoke in their language for several minutes, and Ayanna translated. He says you will need a new name for your new life, she explained. From now on, you will be called Bridgewalker in our language. This name means someone who can move safely between two different worlds and help others cross over too. Thomas felt tears come to his eyes. In his old life, he had just been another cattle rancher. Now he had a name that meant something important, something that represented his purpose in life. Over the following weeks, Thomas learned to live as part of the Apache community. He was given a place to build his own small dwelling near Ayanna and Kaya's home. The women taught him their language, their customs, and their ways of understanding the world. Thomas also began his work as a trader. He made trips to different towns, carefully buying the supplies the community needed. He learned to be cautious, never buying too much in one place or acting in a way that might make people suspicious. The work was dangerous. Some white people did not trust him when they learned he spent time in Apache territory. Others wanted to know too much about where he was going and what he was doing. Thomas had to be very careful not to reveal the location of the hidden valley, but the work was also rewarding. Every time Thomas returned with supplies, he could see the difference it made in people's lives. Children stayed healthier because of the medicine he brought. Farmers grew better crops with the metal tools. Everyone was happier because they had the things they needed to live comfortably. Most importantly, Thomas felt like his life had real meaning for the first time. He was not just surviving or trying to make money. He was helping to build understanding between two groups of people who had been enemies for too long. As winter turned to spring, Thomas realized that he had found his true home. The Apache people had accepted him completely, and he had learned to see the world through their eyes. He would never go back to his old life, no matter what challenges lay ahead. But Thomas did not know that his biggest challenge was coming sooner than he expected. His brother Jacob had not forgotten about him, and Jacob was planning to do something that would put everyone Thomas cared about in terrible danger. Spring brought new life to the hidden valley, and Thomas felt like he was being reborn along with the desert flowers. He had been living with the Apache community for 4 months now, and every day he felt more at home among these people who had accepted him as family. His relationship with Kaya had grown deeper during the long winter months. What had started as friendship was becoming something much more meaningful. They spent hours together each day as she taught him the Apache language and customs. He helped her care for the orphaned children, and they worked side by side in the key fields preparing for the spring planting. Thomas found himself thinking about Kaya all the time. Her gentle way with the children touched his heart. Her wisdom about plants and healing amazed him. Her quiet strength and kindness made him feel peaceful in a way he had never experienced before. One evening in early April, as they sat by the stream watching the sunset, Kaya spoke to Thomas in careful English. "Thomas," she said, "I must tell you something that is in my heart." Thomas turned to look at her, and in her eyes he saw the same feelings that had been growing in his own heart. "I love you," she said simply. "I know this makes things complicated, but I cannot hide my feelings anymore." Thomas felt his heart jump with joy. "I love you too, Kaya. I have loved you since the first night you cared for my horse in the storm." They held hands as the stars came out, talking quietly about their hopes for the future. Thomas had never imagined that love could feel so natural and right. Ayana was happy for them when they told her about their feelings. "I have seen this growing between you for months," she said with a smile. "Kaya has been like a daughter to me since her parents died. I could not wish for a better man to make her happy." The community elders also approved of their relationship. In a simple ceremony by the stream, Thomas and Kaya were married according to Apache customs. Thomas felt proud to be joined to this woman who had taught him so much about kindness and strength. Their first months of marriage were the happiest time of Thomas's life. Kaya moved into the dwelling he had built, and they made a comfortable home together. She continued her work with the orphaned children, and Thomas expanded his trading activities to more distant towns. Thomas was becoming well known as an honest trader in several settlements. Store owners trusted him, and he was able to get better prices for the things the Apache community needed. Some people were curious about where he came from and where he went, but Thomas was careful to give vague answers that did not reveal the location of the hidden valley. Everything seemed perfect until the day in late summer when Thomas returned from a trading trip to find the valley in a state of panic. "What's wrong?" he asked Ayana as soon as he saw her worried face. "Government men came today," she said. "Surveyors. They were measuring the land and making maps." Thomas felt his blood turn cold. How many of them? What did they see? 3 men with instruments for measuring. They saw the farms, the houses, everything. They asked many questions about how long we have lived here. Thomas knew immediately what this meant. The government was planning to move the Apache people to a reservation. The peaceful community that had been hidden for so many years had finally been discovered. That evening, the tribal council met to discuss what they should do. The debate went on for hours, with different people expressing different opinions. Some of the younger men wanted to fight. "We should kill the surveyors before they can report what they found," said one angry voice. "Then we should prepare to defend our valley against whoever comes next." But the older leaders disagreed. "Fighting will only bring more soldiers," said the elderly woman who had first welcomed Thomas. "They will come with many guns and kill our children along with our warriors." Other people suggested that they should pack up and leave immediately, before the government could force them to go. "We could go south to Mexico," suggested one man. "The Mexican government does not hate us the way the Americans do." Thomas listened to all the arguments, but he knew there was really only one realistic choice. The Apache community was too small and peaceful to fight the United States Army, and running away would mean giving up everything they had built over many years. "What about the reservation?" Thomas asked. "What do we know about where they want to send us?" Ayana's face became very sad. "San Carlos Reservation in southern Arizona. It is a terrible place. The land is bad for farming, there is not enough water, and people get sick from diseases. Many Apache people have died there." Thomas had heard stories about the reservation system. The government put Native American tribes on small pieces of bad land and then did not give them enough food or medicine to survive. It was a slow form of murder disguised as policy. After much discussion, the tribal council made their decision. They would not fight, and they would not run away. They would cooperate with the government and go to the reservation peacefully. It was the only choice that might keep their people alive. 2 weeks later, a group of soldiers and government officials arrived in the valley. Their leader was a stern man named Colonel Morrison, who spoke to the Apache people as if they were children. "You will have 3 days to pack your belongings," he announced. "Then you will be moved to San Carlos Reservation, where you will be given land and taught to live like civilized people." Thomas tried to speak with Colonel Morrison, hoping to negotiate better terms for the Apache people, but the colonel was not interested in listening to a white man who lived with Indians. "You're a disgrace to your race," Morrison told Thomas. "You should be grateful we're not arresting you for treason." The next 3 days were heartbreaking. Thomas watched as families packed their few belongings and said goodbye to the homes they had built with their own hands. The children cried because they did not understand why they had to leave. The old people looked lost and frightened. Kaya tried to stay strong, but Thomas could see how much this was hurting her. She had lived in this valley her whole life. Leaving it was like losing part of herself. On the morning of departure, Thomas loaded his few possessions onto his horse and prepared to accompany his adopted people to the reservation. Colonel Morrison tried to stop him. "Where do you think you're going?" the colonel demanded. "With my family," Thomas said firmly. "These people are my family now." Morrison looked disgusted but did not try to stop him. "Suit yourself. But don't expect any special treatment because you're white." The journey to San Carlos took 5 days. Thomas rode beside the wagons carrying the Apache families, trying to help wherever he could. But there was not much he could do to ease their suffering. When they finally reached the reservation, Thomas was shocked by what he saw. The land was dry and rocky, with very little grass or water. The buildings were falling apart, and there was garbage everywhere. The Apache people who were already living there looked thin and sick. Thomas and Kaya were assigned a small shack that was barely big enough for 2 people. The roof leaked, and there were holes in the walls. It was nothing like the comfortable home they had shared in the Hidden Valley. Worst of all, the reservation officials immediately began trying to destroy Apache culture. Children were taken away from their families and sent to schools where they were forbidden to speak their own language. Adults were forced to cut their hair and wear white people's clothing. Traditional ceremonies were banned. Thomas watched his wife grow sadder and weaker every day. The woman who had once been full of life and joy was becoming a shadow of herself. The reservation diet of spoiled meat and moldy grain was making everyone sick. 6 months after arriving at San Carlos, Kaya became ill with a fever that would not break. Thomas did everything he could to help her, but the reservation had no good medicine and no clean water. As Thomas held his dying wife in his arms, Kaya whispered to him in English, "Promise me you will not let them forget who we really are. Promise me you will tell the world the truth about my people." Thomas promised, and Kaya closed her eyes for the last time. She was 25 years old. Thomas buried his wife in the hard reservation soil and felt something die inside himself as well. But he also felt a new determination growing. Kaya's last words had given him a mission that would drive him for the rest of his life. He would find a way to tell the world the truth about what was happening to the Apache people. He would make sure that Kaya's memory and the memory of their beautiful life together would not be forgotten. After Kaya's death, Thomas felt like he was living in a nightmare. The San Carlos Reservation was a place where hope came to die. Every day, he watched proud Apache people being slowly destroyed by hunger, disease, and despair. The reservation officials treated the Apache like prisoners. They were not allowed to leave without permission. Their children were taken away to boarding schools where they were beaten for speaking their own language. The traditional leaders were ignored, and corrupt white agents stole the supplies that were supposed to feed the people. Thomas used his position as a white man to document what was happening. He wrote letters to newspapers, describing the terrible conditions and the deaths that could have been prevented. Most newspapers refused to print his letters, but a few brave editors published his accounts of reservation life. Ayana had also become very sick. The strong woman who had first welcomed Thomas into her home was now weak and struggling to survive on the poor food and dirty water of the reservation. Thomas spent hours caring for her, trying to keep alive the memory of better times. "You must leave this place," Ayana told him one day as he brought her water. "You are still young and you can still make a difference in the world. Do not waste your life dying slowly in this desert prison." But Thomas refused to abandon his adopted family. "I promised Kaya I would tell the truth about what is happening here. I cannot do that if I run away." As months passed, Thomas began to develop a plan. He would leave the reservation but not to escape. He would use his freedom as a white man to fight for the Apache people in the courts and in the halls of government. Thomas had saved money from his trading days, and he used it to hire a lawyer in Phoenix. Together, they began building a case against the government for the illegal treatment of Apache people on the reservation. The lawyer, a young man named David Harrison, was shocked by the evidence Thomas brought him. "This is genocide," Harrison said after reading Thomas's detailed reports. "They're systematically destroying these people." But fighting the government was not easy. The case was thrown out of local courts, and Thomas had to appeal to higher and higher levels of government. It took 2 years of legal battles before Thomas finally got a chance to testify before a congressional committee in Washington. When Thomas stood before the congressman in 1888, he knew this might be his only chance to speak for people who had no voice in the American political system. He had prepared for weeks, organizing his thoughts and gathering evidence. "Gentlemen," Thomas began, "I am here to tell you about a great crime being committed in the name of the American people. I have lived among the Apache people for 3 years, and I have seen how they really live. I have also seen how they are being destroyed on government reservations." Thomas described the peaceful community in the Hidden Valley. He told the congressman about Apache farming techniques, their knowledge of medicine, their care for children and elderly people. He painted a picture of a civilized people who wanted nothing more than to live in peace. Then he described the horrors of San Carlos Reservation. He presented photographs of starving children and documents showing how reservation agents had stolen supplies meant for the Apache people. He read the names of people who had died from preventable diseases. "The woman I married was a healer who saved many lives with her knowledge of plants and medicine," Thomas said, his voice breaking with emotion. "She died on the reservation from a simple fever, because there was no clean water and no proper medicine. Her death was not natural. It was murder by neglect." Some of the congressmen were moved by Thomas's testimony, but others were hostile. One man accused Thomas of being a traitor to his own race. Another suggested that Thomas had been brainwashed by savage people. But Thomas's testimony was printed in newspapers across the country. For the first time, many Americans read a first-hand account of what reservation life was really like. Some people were outraged and demanded changes in government policy. The congressional hearing led to an official investigation of conditions at San Carlos Reservation. Several corrupt agents were fired, and some improvements were made in food, distribution, and medical care. But the basic system remained the same. Thomas realized that legal action alone would not be enough to save the Apache people. He needed to change the way Americans thought about Native Americans. So he began writing a book about his experiences. It took Thomas 3 years to write his memoir. He worked mostly at night, after spending his days helping Apache families navigate the reservation bureaucracy. He wrote about the storm that first brought him to Ayana and Kaya, about the Hidden Valley and its peaceful community, about his marriage to Kaya and her tragic death. But most importantly, Thomas wrote about the lies that white Americans told themselves about Native American people. He challenged every stereotype and showed his readers that Apache people were just as intelligent, caring, and civilized as anyone else. When Bridge Walker, My Life Among the Apache was published in 1892, it became a sensation. The book sold thousands of copies and was translated into several languages. For the first time, many Americans read a detailed, sympathetic account of Native American life, written by someone they trusted, a white man who had nothing to gain by lying. The book made Thomas famous, but it also made him many enemies. Some people called him a traitor and threatened his life. Others accused him of making up stories to sell books. But Thomas continued to speak the truth, no matter how much criticism he faced. Thomas used the money from his book to establish a foundation that provided legal help to Native American tribes fighting government policies. He hired lawyers to challenge illegal land seizures and worked to improve conditions on reservations across the country. As Thomas grew older, he never remarried. The love he had shared with Kaya had been perfect and complete, and he felt that no other relationship could match it. Instead, he dedicated his life to honoring her memory by fighting for her people. Thomas also maintained his relationship with Ayanna, who survived the reservation years and lived to see some improvements in government policy. She became like a mother to him, and they often talked about Kaya and the beautiful life they had all shared in the Hidden Valley. "You have kept your promise," Ayanna told Thomas on her deathbed in 1905. "Kaya would be proud of what you have done. You have built a bridge between our peoples, just as your Apache name said you would." Thomas lived until 1923, spending 43 years fighting for Native American rights. His work helped change American laws and attitudes, though progress was slow and sometimes painful. In his final years, Thomas often thought about that stormy night in 1885 when he first sought shelter with two Apache sisters. That night had changed him from a simple cattle rancher into something he never could have imagined: a voice for the voiceless and a bridge between two worlds. Thomas's memoir remained in print long after his death, inspiring new generations of people to fight for justice and understanding between different cultures. His story proved that one person, motivated by love and truth, could make a difference in the world. The Hidden Valley where Thomas first learned about Apache life was eventually turned into a national park, preserving forever the memory of the peaceful community that had once thrived there. A plaque at the entrance tells visitors about the Apache people who lived there and about the white man who chose to share their lives and fight for their rights. Thomas McAllister had started his journey as an innocent young rancher seeking winter, grazing for his cattle. He ended it as one of the most important advocates for Native American rights in American history. All because of one stormy night when two Apache sisters showed kindness to a stranger, and that stranger had the wisdom to see the truth that their kindness revealed.